I came home that evening expecting the usual dinner, maybe a half-hearted conversation, and then another night of silence while she scrolled through her phone, pretending I didn't exist. What I got instead was something much worse. The house smelled different. Not just the air, but the walls, the furniture, the fabric of the couch I had collapsed onto so many nights. It was subtle, but it was there something that didn't belong. It wasn't her perfume, and it sure as hell wasn't mine. A sickly, musky scent that settled in my lungs like a warning. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood there for a moment, listening. The house was still. Too still. Like it had been emptied of something, but I couldn't yet tell what. Then I saw the note. A torn piece of paper left carelessly on the kitchen island. A few scribbled words written in a rush. Like she couldn't wait to get the hell out. I'm done pretending to love you. I'm taking everything and moving in with him. That was it. No name. No explanation. Just that. I read it once. Twice. My brain refused to process it. There was no "I'm sorry," no "I hope you understand," no attempt at softening the blow. Just a flat, emotionless statement. Like I was a bad habit she was finally kicking. I leaned on the counter, staring at the note, and something inside me settled. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Something quieter. Like the moment right before a storm when everything is too still, too quiet, and you just know the sky is about to split open. I grabbed a pen from the drawer and wrote back. Simple. Direct. Got your note. Appreciate the heads up. Then I did exactly what she never expected me to do. I walked through the house, room by room, and took everything that was mine. Every last thing I had ever paid for. The TV. The couch. The bed. Even the damn silverware. I loaded it all into a truck, drove to a storage unit, and locked it up tight. By the time I was done, the house was empty. Hollow. Just like her words. And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. She came back that night. Maybe she thought she'd left something behind. Maybe she wanted to twist the knife a little deeper. But when she walked in, expecting to find our home, she found for empty walls and a kitchen that looked like no one had ever lived there. And then she saw my note. I heard the scream before I even saw her. A raw, guttural sound that rattled through the empty space. A tantrum, a breakdown. An explosion of rage from someone who had never, ever been denied what she wanted. She turned, eyes wild, mouth twisted into something that was meant to be words but came out as nothing but noise. I stood there, leaning against the doorway, watching, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing at all. She stormed toward me like a hurricane, her hands clenched into fists, her whole body shaking with fury. Her voice finally caught up with her rage, and the words came pouring out like venom. What the hell did you do? I didn't move, didn't blink, just let her anger crash against me like a wave breaking on stone. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Not this time. She stomped past me, her eyes darting around the gutted house like she expected her things to reappear out of thin air. Like I had somehow misunderstood her little farewell letter and accidentally taken everything she planned to keep. Her breathing was ragged, her chest rising and falling in sharp, angry movements. "Where's my stuff?" she demanded, turning back to me, her eyes burning with accusation. I almost laughed. Her stuff? The couch? My jewelry? My clothes, she shrieked. "Where did you put my things?" I tilted my head slightly like I was actually considering an answer. "Oh," I said casually, "you mean my things?" "Yeah, they're somewhere safe." Her nostrils flared. "You took why?" "No," I cut in, my voice low but sharp. "I took what I paid for." Which turns out was everything. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her mind clearly racing for some way to spin this in her favor. But the math wasn't adding up in her head. She had been so sure she was in control. That she was the one walking away, leaving me behind like some pitiful, heartbroken idiot. She hadn't expected this. Her lips curled in frustration. "You're being petty," she spat. "You're acting like a damn child." I folded my arms across my chest, my expression unreadable. "I don't think the one who left a scribbled breakup note in the kitchen gets to call me childish." Her face twisted. "You're punishing me," she snapped, as if she was the victim here. "You're trying to hurt me because you can't handle the fact that I'm leaving." I smiled. Actually smiled. And that seemed to piss her off even more. "Oh, I can handle it," I said. "I'm just making sure you really leave. Isn't that what you wanted?" She took a step toward me, her hands trembling at her sides. "You can't just—" "I can." I interrupted smoothly. And I did. Her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth. She turned, running her hands through her hair, pacing like a trapped animal. For the first time, she was the one panicking. She was the one who didn't know what came next. I did. She stopped suddenly and whirled around. Where are the keys? She demanded. I raised an eyebrow. To what? The car, she snapped. The car that was in my name. The one I had bought. The one she had been driving around like it belonged to her. I pulled the key from my pocket and held it up between two fingers. Her eyes locked onto it like a predator spotting prey. But before she could take a step, I turned and tossed it into the empty kitchen sink with a clink. Her eyes flickered to it, then back to me, calculating. She wanted to lunge for it, but she also didn't want to give me the satisfaction. So instead, she narrowed her eyes and gave me a slow, mocking smile. You think this is funny? She said, tilting her head. You think you're so clever? I shrugged. I think you got exactly what you asked for. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, baby, you have no idea what you just started. Her voice was low now, almost purring, a fake sweetness coating her words. She was shifting tactics, trying to regain control. She took a slow step toward me, her eyes locked onto mine. You really want to play this game? She murmured. I didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Another step. I know exactly how to destroy you, she whispered, her voice dripping with poisonous honey. I leaned down just enough to meet her eyes, my voice as calm as ever. You already did, I said. And look how that turned out. For the first time, her confidence wavered. She hadn't expected me to be this unshaken. She had expected tears, begging desperation. She had expected pain. Instead, all she got was a man who had nothing left to lose. She stood there, her confidence slipping in real time, like a gambler who just realized they bet everything on a losing hand. The house was empty. Her plan had crumbled, and I wasn't playing the role she had written for me. She wanted tears. She wanted me to collapse, to scream, to ask why. She wasn't getting that. Instead, she was getting silence, and I could see it in her eyes. That was killing her. She squared her shoulders, adjusting the strap of the expensive handbag I had bought her, trying to hold on to whatever power she thought she had left. Then, with a slow breath, she pivoted. The venom vanished, replaced by something softer. Manipulation. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice suddenly gentle. You don't have to be cruel. I almost laughed. Cruel? I glanced at the note still sitting on the counter, her words scrawled in careless ink. I'm done pretending to love you. I'm taking everything and moving in with him. And I was the cruel one? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. What's the problem? I asked, tilting my head slightly. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Her lips parted, her tongue darting out to wet them, another tactic. She was recalculating, rewiring her approach in real time, shifting gears so fast it almost impressed me. This isn't what I wanted, she said finally, voice soft, like she was some tragic heroine in a romance movie. Not like this. I didn't bite. Oh, I asked, arching an eyebrow. How did you want it? Did you want to waltz back in here whenever you felt like it? Did you want me to sit in the ruins you left behind, waiting for you to drop breadcrumbs of attention? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like that. This is childish, she murmured, shaking her head. There it was again. That same weak insult. She walked past me, her heels clicking against the bare floors as she headed toward the sink. I knew what she was doing, making a play for the car keys. A final desperate attempt to leave with something. I let her. She reached the sink, fingers closing around the key. She took a sharp breath, steadied herself, then turned back to me with a smirk. And then I said the one thing that shattered the last bit of control she had. Oh, I wouldn't do that. She froze. Her fingers tightened around the key, her knuckles going white. Why not? She asked, her voice a little too even. I let the silence drag out just long enough for her pulse to spike. Then I said it. Because I reported it stolen. The air in the room shifted. She went completely still, processing, trying to decide if I was bluffing. I wasn't. Her expression flickered, shock, rage, disbelief all in the span of a second. You didn't, she whispered. I smiled. Didn't I? Her chest rose and fell, her breathing sharp. You're lying. I shrugged. You want to test that theory? For the first time, she looked uncertain. Her mind was spinning, trying to figure out the odds. If she got into that car, if she drove off, would she get pulled over? Would she be arrested? Was I really that petty? She knew me. Knew that I wasn't the type to make empty threats. Her jaw clenched, her fingers shaking slightly as she dropped the keys back into the sink with a metallic clink. She was losing. And she knew it. She turned to face me fully, her eyes searching mine, trying to find some weak spot, some crack she could slip through. I loved you, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't flinch. Didn't react. Because that was a lie. No, I said, my voice calm. You loved the way I loved you. She blinked. For a moment, just a moment, she looked like she might say something real. Something honest. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. The mask snapped back into place, her expression smoothing into something unreadable. She turned on her heel and walked toward the door, her movements sharp, controlled. She reached for the handle, hesitated for just a second, then pulled it open. The cold night air rushed in as she stepped out. I didn't stop her. Didn't say another word. I just watched as she walked away, empty-handed, into the darkness. The door shut behind her, and for a moment, the silence was suffocating. The kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the air is thick with the weight of everything that just happened. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, listening to the fading sound of her footsteps on the pavement. She was gone. No screaming. No more manipulations. No last-minute pleas or insults. Just gone. And yet I didn't move. I didn't exhale. Because I knew her. I knew this wasn't over. I walked to the window, carefully pulling the curtain aside just enough to see outside. She was standing by the curb, her phone pressed to her ear, pacing in tight, angry circles. Even from here, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the frustration in the way she kept running her fingers through her hair. Who was she calling? The other man? Someone to come pick her up? Or was this something worse? I watched as she stopped pacing, her head snapping toward the house. Her lips moved quickly, angry, desperate words thrown into the phone, and then she turned, her movements sharp with purpose. She was coming back. I let the curtain fall back into place and took a slow, deep breath. Here we go. The knock came a few seconds later. Not a hesitant knock. Not the kind of knock you use when you actually want someone to open the door. No, this was a demand. A warning. 3 sharp bangs that echoed through the empty house. I walked over but didn't open it. Knock. 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 Open the door, she said, her voice muffled through the wood. I stayed quiet. I know you're there. Still, I didn't move. The handle rattled. She was testing it, checking if I had locked it. I had. A pause. Then, her voice, lower now. You really want to do this? I finally spoke, my voice even. You left. I could almost hear her grinding her teeth. I need my things. You don't have any things here. A sharp exhale. You can't just, I interrupted. And I did. Silence. Then, laughter. Bitter, humorless laughter. Wow, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? I didn't answer. Fine, she snapped. Fine. You want to act like this? I'll make a few calls. See how funny you think this is when I open the door. Just enough for her to see my face. Just enough to make her shut the hell up. Her words died in her throat. She had been expecting the same man she had left behind. The one who used to put up with everything. The one who bent over backward to keep the peace, to avoid the fights, to make sure she was happy. But that man was gone. And she saw it. She saw it in my expression, in my stance, in the way I was looking at her like she was just another stranger on my doorstep. Her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to say something. But nothing came out. So I helped her. You don't have power here anymore, I said quietly. She flinched. It was small, barely noticeable, but I saw it. You can threaten, you can scream, you can cry, I continued, my voice steady. But none of it works on me anymore. Her eyes darted away for a second like she needed to gather herself. When she looked back, there was something different there. A new strategy forming. She exhaled slowly. I don't want to fight, she said, her voice suddenly softer. I just need some of my things. Just the essentials. A small, sad smile. Please. Ah. And there it was. The final tactic. Pity. I stared at her for a long moment, then reached into my pocket. Her eyes lit up slightly, hopeful, expecting me to hand over something. Instead, I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward her. Her face drained of color. She knew what she was looking at before I even said a word. The security footage. A clear, time-stamped video of her and him in my house when she thought I wasn't home. Her breath hitched. I tilted my head. Still think you're in a position to ask for favors? She swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. I changed the locks, I said calmly, filed a police report, and sent copies of this to my lawyer. Her nostrils flared. You wouldn't. I smiled. Wouldn't I? She opened her mouth, but this time, no words came out. No defense. No excuse. No last-minute manipulation. Just silence. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw it, the realization that she had truly lost. That was the moment she knew. She had played the game, and I had beaten her at it. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, her hands gripping the strap of her overpriced handbag like it was the only thing holding her together. I watched her, waiting for the lie, the excuse, the manipulation. Because that's what she did, wasn't it? She twisted reality to suit her, bent words like metal until they fit the shape she wanted. But this time, there was nothing to twist. The truth was staring her dead in the face. And she knew it. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her gaze flickered between me and the phone in my hand, her breath just a little too sharp, her fingers just a little too tense. I could feel her calculating, trying to find an opening, trying to claw back even a sliver of control. And then she exhaled. Slow. Controlled. And just like that, her expression shifted. The panic vanished. The anger smoothed over. Her posture softened, her lips pressed together in something that almost resembled regret. She was about to perform. I never wanted to hurt you, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I tilted my head slightly. But you did. Her lower lip trembled and she reached up, brushing her fingers across her cheek like she was trying to hold back non-existent tears. I was lost, she said softly. You don't know what it was like, feeling so alone, so unloved. No, my voice was quiet, but sharp enough to slice through whatever bullshit monologue she was about to deliver. You don't get to do that. You don't get to rewrite history just because you got caught. Her jaw clenched. I took a step forward, just enough to close the space between us. She didn't move back, didn't retreat, because that wasn't her style. No, she doubled down. Always. I'm not the villain here, she whispered, her voice shaking just enough to sound authentic. I made a mistake. But you there it was. The shift. The blame. The attempt to make this my fault. I what? I asked, my voice perfectly calm. I didn't grovel at your feet? Didn't let you take whatever you wanted and walk away like some tragic heroine? Her lips parted slightly. You wanted to humiliate me? I continued, my tone even, unwavering. You wanted me broken, begging, drowning in your mess. But look at you. I let my gaze drag over her, slow and deliberate. You're the one standing here empty-handed. Her breathing was uneven now. You don't have to be so. So what? I interrupted. Honest. A flicker of something crossed her face. Frustration, maybe even fear. But it was gone too fast for me to catch. For the first time in years, she was looking at me, really looking at me, and realizing she didn't know who the hell she was dealing with anymore. I had changed. She didn't break me. She didn't destroy me. She set me free. And that scared her. I stepped back, pocketing my phone. We're done here. Her mouth opened. One last desperate attempt to win. To say something that would tilt the scales back in her favor. But before she could get a single word out, I closed the door in her face. Just like that. No dramatic goodbye. No lingering looks. No chance for her to claw her way back in. Clean break. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, the sound of her palm slamming against the door. Once. Twice. Then her voice, sharp and furious. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. Didn't react. Because I wouldn't. Her footsteps stormed away. Each one filled with frustration. With rage. With the knowledge that she had lost. And I stood there, exhaling slowly, the weight of everything finally settling in. It was over. She was gone. And for the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't move for a long time. Just stood there, staring at the door, listening to the sound of her storming away into the night. The echo of her footsteps faded, swallowed up by the quiet street outside. I imagined her standing there, gripping her phone, dialing numbers with shaking fingers, trying to find someone, anyone who would still pick up. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I turned away, exhaling slowly as I ran a hand over my face. My body still buzzed with adrenaline, my mind still replaying everything, dissecting every word, every expression, every desperate attempt she had made to regain control. But it was done. She was gone. And I had one. I walked through the empty house, my footsteps unnervingly loud against the bare floors. It looked nothing like it had before. No framed photos on the walls. No neatly folded blankets on the couch. No scent of her perfume clinging to the air. It wasn't a home anymore, just a hollow shell, stripped of everything that had once made it ours. But that was a lie, wasn't it? Because it had never really been ours. It had always been mine. I was the one who built it. I was the one who filled it, who maintained it, who held it together while she played her games behind my back. And now, for the first time, it was truly mine again. I moved into the kitchen, glancing at the note she had left, the one that had set all of this in motion. The paper was still sitting on the counter, crumpled at the edges from where I had picked it up. Read it, processed it. I'm done pretending to love you. I'm taking everything and moving in with him. I picked it up again, staring at the words. So simple, so direct, like I was nothing more than an afterthought, like she had been waiting for this moment. Maybe she had. I thought back to the months leading up to this, how distant she had been, how effortlessly she had started slipping away. The late nights, the guarded phone, the sudden coldness in her touch. She had already been leaving me long before she ever put it into words. She just never expected me to leave her first. A sharp knock on the door made me tense. I knew it was her before I even turned around. Of course, she wasn't done. I walked back toward the front, but this time, I didn't open it. Another knock. I know you're still in there. Silence. She sighed, her voice softer now. Look, I don't want things to end like this. I almost laughed. What, you mean badly? I said through the door, my voice dripping with amusement. Seems a little late for that. A pause. I made a mistake. There it was. The beginning of her next game. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, letting the moment drag out. Letting her sweat. She wanted me to ask what mistake. She wanted me to open the door, to see her standing there looking vulnerable, remorseful, fixable. I didn't. Instead, I said, and which mistake was that? She hesitated. That was the thing about her. She was quick on her feet, but she needed control of the conversation. And right now, I wasn't giving her that. So she adjusted. Leaving like that, she said carefully. Not talking to you first. I huffed a quiet laugh. Talking? Is that what we're pretending this was missing? I was scared, she continued. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. And now you do? Yes, she said immediately. Too quickly. I didn't need to ask. I already knew. She had left thinking she was upgrading. That whatever fantasy she had built up in her head with him was going to be everything she wanted. But reality had set in fast. And now? Now she was realizing she had just bet everything on the wrong damn horse. I could almost hear her pride cracking as she forced out the words. I want to fix this. I smirked. Fix what? She exhaled sharply. Us. I shook my head, still not moving to open the door. You mean me. You want to fix me. You want me back in the place you left me waiting like some lovesick idiot. That's not. I cut her off. Let me ask you something, I said, my voice steady. If I had begged you to stay when you left, would you have? Silence. That was my answer. I chuckled, shaking my head. You don't want us. You want stability, comfort, a backup plan. And I'm not interested. She sucked in a breath. So that's it. I could hear it now, the frustration, the anger bubbling beneath her carefully constructed facade, the realization that I wasn't falling into my old patterns. That's it, I confirmed. A sharp pause. Then her voice cold now. "You'll regret this." And there it was. The final card, the last-ditch effort to scare me back into place. I sighed, shaking my head. "I already don't." Silence. Then her footsteps retreating. This time I knew she wouldn't be back. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. Relief. I stood there long after her footsteps faded, my hand resting lightly against the doorframe, listening to nothing but the sound of my own breathing. It was over. This time for real. I should have felt triumphant, victorious, like a man who had just won the battle of a lifetime. But as I turned away from the door, as I walked through the empty, gutted house, the feeling that settled inside me wasn't victory. It was clarity. Because the truth was, I had been blind for a long time. Not just to the affair, not just to the lies, but to her. To the kind of person she really was. To the kind of relationship we really had. I moved through the kitchen, my fingers brushing over the bare countertops, the empty space where our appliances had been. I had taken everything, packed it up, locked it away, and yet, somehow the house still felt like it belonged to her. The ghosts of our life together still clung to the walls, whispering from the corners. I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my jacket off the chair and walked outside, locking the door behind me. The night air was cool, crisp, the streetlights humming faintly above me. I glanced down the road, half expecting to see her car still there, to see her sitting behind the wheel, watching, waiting, hoping I would change my mind. But she was gone. Good. I got in my truck and started driving, my fingers tapping against the wheel as I moved through the quiet streets. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move, to put distance between me and the wreckage she had left behind. Somewhere between the second and third turn, my phone buzzed. I didn't check it right away. I knew who it was. But when I reached a red light, I glanced down at the screen. One new message. I exhaled through my nose, debating for a split second whether to ignore it. But curiosity won. I tapped the screen. "Her. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted." I stared at the words, my grip tightening slightly on the wheel. She still didn't get it. She thought this was a game, a fight with a winner and a loser. She thought I had been playing just like she had, that I had been strategizing, manipulating, trying to hurt her the way she had hurt me. She didn't understand that I hadn't done any of this out of spite. I had done it because I was done. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and kept driving. Another buzz, then another. I ignored them. Somewhere along the way, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. One of those old-school places with flickering neon signs and worn-out booths. The kind of place where no one asks questions. I slid into a seat by the window, ordering a black coffee from a tired-looking waitress who barely even glanced at me. As I waited, I reached for my phone again, finally checking the messages. More of the same. "Her, you think you're so perfect? Her, you think you never made mistakes? Her, you'll regret this when you realize no one else will put up with you." I took a slow sip of coffee unfazed. The messages weren't for me. They were for her. A desperate attempt to convince herself that she still had some kind of control. That she wasn't the one who had lost. That I would eventually wake up and see things her way. I didn't reply. She didn't deserve a reply. Instead, I blocked her number, set the phone face down on the table, and took another sip of coffee. Outside, the street was empty. The city was quiet. And for the first time in years, so was my mind. The coffee was bitter. Strong. Exactly what I needed. I sat there in the dim light of the diner, watching the steam rise from the cup, listening to the faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Outside, the world was still. No cars rushing by, no voices breaking the silence. Just the occasional flicker of a street lamp struggling to stay alive. I had always liked places like this. The ones that never closed. The ones that felt like they existed outside of time, untouched by the chaos of the world. And maybe that's what I needed. To step outside of time. To sit here, in this worn-out booth, and let reality catch up to me. Because despite everything, despite the anger, the relief, the finality of it all, there was something else lurking beneath it. Something I hadn't let myself acknowledge yet. Grief. Not for her. But for the idea of her. The version of her that I had loved. The version of us that I had believed in. The life I had built, the future I had imagined gone, just like that. And I wasn't stupid. I knew it had been a lie for a long time. Knew that the cracks had been there, spreading like fractures in glass, waiting for the right moment to shatter. But knowing something and feeling it were two different things. I let out a slow breath, rubbing my thumb against the handle of the coffee cup. I had spent so much time fighting. So much time proving that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't going to let her win. And I had won. I had stripped her of her power, left her with nothing but the consequences of her own choices. So why did it still feel like I had lost something? The door chimed as someone walked into the diner, and I glanced up instinctively. A woman, maybe in her 40s, wearing a jacket too thin for the cold. She sat at the counter, rubbing her hands together for warmth. She ordered coffee. No food. The waitress poured her a cup, and the woman wrapped her fingers around it, breathing in the steam like it was the only thing keeping her going. I looked away, back at my own drink, my stomach twisting slightly. I had been so focused on my own mess, my own wreckage, that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next. Not just how to move on, but who I would be when I did. Because I had spent so much time being her husband. Even in the worst moments, even when I had known something was wrong, I had still been tethered to her, to the life we had built together. And now? Now I was just me. I didn't know what that meant yet. Didn't know what that looked like. But for the first time, I wanted to find out. I finished my coffee, left a few bills on the table, and stepped outside. The air was sharp, crisp, carrying the distant scent of rain. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, breathing in deep, feeling the weight of everything settle in my chest. Then I let it go. I walked to my truck, got inside, and started the engine. The hum of it filled the silence, grounding me, anchoring me to now. Not the past, not the mistakes, just this moment. And as I pulled out of the lot, driving toward whatever came next, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and empty, the headlights cutting through the night like a blade. The city had long since settled into its quiet hours, the streets lined with closed-up shops and flickering neon signs that buzzed faintly in the distance. I didn't know where I was going. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't bother me. I just drove. The weight that had been sitting in my chest, pressing down on me for years, was finally starting to lift. It wasn't gone yet, not completely. Wounds like this don't just disappear overnight. But the suffocating, crushing feeling of being trapped? That was fading. And in its place, something new was creeping in. Freedom. Not the reckless kind. Not the kind that made me want to go out and drink myself into oblivion or find someone else to fill the space she had left behind. No, this was something quieter. More certain. For the first time in years, my life was mine again. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I didn't look at it right away. I already knew it wasn't her, she was blocked. And even if she found another way to reach me, I wasn't interested. After a few minutes at a red light, I finally glanced at the screen. A message from my lawyer. I tapped it open. Paperwork is ready. Just need your signature to finalize everything. I stared at the message, letting the reality of it settle over me. Finalize everything. The last step. The official, legally binding end to a marriage that had been over long before she walked out that door. I should have felt something. Anger. Sadness. Regret. But all I felt was done. The light turned green. I tossed the phone back onto the seat and kept driving. At some point, I found myself heading toward my storage unit, the one where I had packed up everything I took from the house. I hadn't been back since that night, hadn't needed to. But now something in me wanted to see it. To remind myself that she had left me with nothing. And yet I had everything. I pulled into the lot, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cool night air. The place was deserted, the metal doors of the units lined up like silent witnesses to everything people tried to hold onto. I unlocked mine, rolling the door open with a heavy clank. The sight of it hit me harder than I expected. Everything I had taken, everything that had once filled a home, was crammed into this small, lifeless space. The couch. The TV. The boxes of dishes, books, random things we had collected over the years. It was all mine. And yet, standing there, staring at it, I realized something. I didn't want most of it. Because it wasn't really mine. It was ours. And ours didn't exist anymore. I stepped inside, running my fingers over the back of the couch, remembering the nights I had sat there waiting for her to come home. The mornings I had woken up alone, even when she was still sleeping beside me. The slow, painful realization that I had been in a marriage with a stranger. A deep breath. Then I grabbed a box cutter from one of the shelves and started opening things up. Sorting. Deciding what I actually wanted to keep. Some things I set aside, stuff that was truly mine, things I had bought for me. The rest? I'd sell it, donate it, get rid of it, because I didn't need reminders of a life that wasn't real. An hour passed, maybe more. By the time I was done, the space felt lighter. And so did I. I locked up, got back into my truck, and checked my phone again. One last time. I pulled up the email from my lawyer, opened the attached documents, and without hesitation, I signed them. A name at the bottom of a digital page. A click. And just like that, I was free. The moment I signed my name, something inside me shifted. Not a crash. Not a thunderous, earth-shattering realization. Something quieter. Like the final turn of a key in a lock. Like the last note of a song fading into silence. I sat there in my truck, the screen of my phone glowing in the darkness, staring at the confirmation message. Your submission has been received. That was it. No dramatic ending. No fireworks. Just a few lines of text confirming that my marriage, the thing I had spent years fighting for, suffering through, trying to fix, was now nothing more than a file in some lawyer's office. And I felt nothing. No regret. No sadness. Just a strange, weightless emptiness. The kind that comes when you've been carrying something too heavy for too long and you finally put it down. I took a breath. Then another. And for the first time in years, it felt like I was actually breathing. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life beneath me. The night stretched out ahead, endless and open, waiting. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't trapped anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to come home or wondering if she would answer my calls or questioning whether the distance between us was just in my head. She was gone. And I was still here. I pulled onto the road, driving with no real destination in mind. The city lights blurred past, the streets familiar but somehow different, like I was seeing them for the first time. Somewhere along the way, I stopped at a red light and glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked the same. But I wasn't. Because the man staring back at me wasn't the same man who had loved her. He wasn't the same man who had begged for scraps of affection. Who had made excuses. Who had held onto something that had been rotting for years. That man was gone. And the one sitting here now? He was free. The light turned green. And without a second thought, I drove forward,